All right. Good afternoon. I hope everybody's had a great start to the afternoon, got your lunch, maybe coming up with a cup of coffee here to our afternoon webinar. And we've got a fantastic event for you today. It's improving federal cybersecurity with event data. And honestly, this is not a topic I was so attuned to, but it was spelled out in the presidential executive order, the cybersecurity executive order, and it's now going to the forefront. Of course, with these orders, sometimes you're not getting funding. So we're going to talk about a lot of these issues, the challenges of collecting the data, the retention of the data, and I think you're in for a real treat this afternoon. I want to welcome all the attendees. Special thanks to the Confluent team for helping ATARC put together this webinar, John Lee, Will LaForest, who you'll be introduced to in a minute. But today we are going to have a lot of dialogue with our panel, and then we're going to have some polls. We're going to throw in some polls, and then we're going to get some questions from the audience. But if my panel can come on to the forefront here, we'll get things rolling. We'll do some quick introductions, and then each of the panelists will give us a little deep dive on their take on what's going on in their respective agencies, and how this topic and the cybersecurity executive order et al. will come into play. So if we can get Allison and Joe, you guys can come on. But real quick intros here. We'll start off with Ralph Mozios, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at Federal Housing Finance Agency. Good morning, Ralph, and how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you inviting me to participate in this panel. Although I guess thank you.
Working from home today? Yeah, go ahead.
So I should say thank you to Alyssa for inviting me. So she's been a heavy lifter here for those of us on the panel side. But as Tom, as you indicated, I've been the federal CISO for the Federal Housing Finance Agency for the past 10 years, which is kind of hard to believe. And we're a relatively small organization with about 1,000 people. So
hey Ralph, I'm going to address. I'll get you up. You'll be up in a second. I'm just going to go ahead and get some quick intros so everybody can get familiarized with everybody. I'll get back to you. Sorry I didn't explain that. Fantastic. But anyway, and the next panelist is Allison McCall, Chief Information Officer for the NTIS, National Technical Information Services. Thank you for joining us, Allison. It looks like from your home. Where is your home?
My home is in southern Anne Arundel County, Deal. We had quite a lot of flooding last week.
Yeah, it's been one of these. Well, look at today. It's been off and on all day. Great. We also have Paul Blahush. Did I get anywhere near that on that pronunciation there, Paul?
Well, that's okay, Tom. It's pronounced Blahush, but I've accepted many pronunciations over the years.
Yeah, I try to get it right. Sorry about that. And Paul is the Chief Information Security Officer for the United States Department of Labor. And it looks like you're working from home today.
I am, yes.
I have to admit, I did work in the Department of Labor for one summer in 1989, fixing computers on the 6th floor next to the cafeteria. So I just pretty much dated myself. It seems like a long time ago now that I think about it.
Well, as I recall, that was one of the best IT years in the Department of Labor, and I think it was because of you then. Yeah.
That's what I hear. That's what I heard. These computers.
That summer was outstanding. Yes.
Thank you, Paul. We also have Joe Ramsey, who's the Chief Information Security Officer from the International Trade Administration.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, Paul. Yep. And you look like you're in an undisclosed location. Where can you tell me where you are?
I am in my kitchen, so also working from home.
Okay. Fantastic. And last but not least, certainly Will LaForest, who is a regular. I don't know if he's the most regular, but he's right up there. Public sector technology, Chief Technology Officer at Confluent. And how are you doing today, Will?
Great. I also spent a summer working a job that I never repeated, but mine was as a mover. So I was like, I'm never doing another day of hard blue collar labor in my life. It's the hardest thing I ever did.
Will, is that actually your house?
No, I wish it's just a very good background.
It really is. It really is. And where are you working out of today?
I'm here in Vienna, Virginia.
Okay. Yeah, I was about to call your interior decorator. That was pretty, kind of like modern. I loved it. Great. Well, why don't we just start off with you, Ralph? Let us know a little bit about what's going on in your agency, how you're meeting the mandate, and just some of the challenges that you have there at the Federal Housing Finance Agency.
Yeah, so thank you again, Tom. So yeah, so this is my second panel, Tom. I won't date myself. I've been around the block a few times, but my first panel with you was back in May called Life After SolarWinds, right? So it works out pretty well that I'm here today speaking about the demands of event data and what we're going to be doing with it, right? I think you alluded to
that's right.
To the president's, to the executive order, and following the executive order that was signed in May, Office of Management and Budget, right? They issued this directive called M21, which is keeping a few of us busy amongst all the other directives that we have to support, right? Improving the federal government's investigative and remediation capabilities. So really for those of us that spent a little bit of quality time last year, right? Last December dealing with the SolarWinds compromise, we all understand how important it is to maintain the logs, to catch the logs. But this directive goes a little bit further along, right? Because it says we have to retain logs for a lot longer. We have to have hot and cold logs, if you would, across hybrid environments. So that poses a challenge for us, right? There's a lot of different logs coming from different places, and what we're going to do with it. So when you start to put all of these cyber requirements together, a number of different questions come to mind, right? How are we going to pay for all of this? It's not like any of these directives came with, people, resources, and money to do some of these things, but, it's a challenge that we have to face, right? So the questions I really want to pose for the group and, the audience as a whole is, what are we going to do with all of these logs besides just collecting them, right? For investigative purposes. Clearly, we know it's needed for that, but how are we going to proactively use logs, right, to tell us something? And then something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis as a CISO, and I know my colleagues have probably similar challenges. How are we going to prioritize this particular directive with all the 100 other top priority one projects, right? That's a challenge that I think many of us are going to have to deal with. So I'd like to pass on the torch to give someone else a chance to ask and pose some of their thoughts.
No problem. Thanks for that, Ralph. How about we go with you next, Allison?
Okay.
Allison Paul, Chief Information Officer, NTIS, which is a part of the department, very important part of the Department of Commerce.
Thank you. Yes, we, as a part of the Department of Commerce, we will be handling this as a group through the CIO Council and the CISO Council, but it definitely poses a challenge. We ourselves keep logs, but this memorandum is very detailed. It has a lot of nuances, and so there's going to be some work that has to be done. We also do a lot of work for other federal agencies. We have a joint venture partnership, and we help federal agencies with their data. And in doing that, we've done a lot of work already in applying artificial intelligence, machine learning, and predictive analytics to logs such as this to make them even more meaningful. So, we were having a good discussion yesterday that we want to comply with this memorandum, but we also want to have meaning, and we want to really increase our efforts as we're having more and more problems in the cybersecurity area.
Hey, Tom, I think you're on mute
Yeah,
there.
you're on mute, Tom.
Yeah, I clicked I've only been doing this for 2 years. You think I'd get this right? Paul, you work at a cabinet level agency. you have to deal with, not only internally, but then you have to deal with all the sub agencies and working with them. Look forward to hearing from you on this topic.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. Well, let me start by a little bit deeper dive into sort of some of my background and what we do at DOL. 30 years in IT, much like you, Tom. I started in 1989. So, and then 20 years in cybersecurity, and I've been the CISO for 2.5 years at Department of Labor. And as the CISO at the Department of Labor, I direct a team that provides for the department Security Operations Center, policy and planning, and system security management and assessment capabilities. And I'd like to give the audience, the attendees, a little idea of the environment that we're coming from in DOL. We've got 27 varying mission areas. We produce unemployment numbers out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We provide employment services, job placement, work visas, apprenticeship opportunities, transitioning veterans to civilian life are just some of the programs that we have. A lot of that involves very sensitive data, including personally identifiable information. I've got listed here that we have 94.8 million records. I can't vouch for that personally, but apparently that's the number that we use. We have 77 reportable information systems for FISMA and about a $685 million IT portfolio. Our governance structure might be of interest to people. We are fairly centrally governed since a recent IT consolidation effort that moved all the component agency IT under the OCIO, except for a few sub-agencies. So we do have a handful of sub-agencies that still do their own IT, but 80 to 90% of IT is now under the CIO, which does help with efforts like this, right? Where it's like, hey, as an entire department, do something. I've got like 80 to 90% that really we can drag along as an organizational structure type thing, and then reach out, lead, and engage with the component agencies. We're proud of, but unsatisfied with our B grade in FITARA for cyber. Some of our challenges, I think these are somewhat common, right? We're trying to go from this level of logging all the way up to now this level of logging, and what are the ripple challenges of that? What is going to happen with processing, with storage, with capacity of the network and things like that? Also, as someone mentioned, how do we make this more valuable than we're just storing a lot of data in case CISA needs it? So I think those are the things I'm focused on here.
Great, thank you for that. And next we'll go with Joe Ramsey, Chief Information Security Officer, back in the Department of Commerce at the International Trade Administration. And I think, Joe, you definitely need to talk about your unique mission compared to maybe some other agencies. And with your CIO, we of course know the last couple that you've had over there, good people.
Yeah. So yes, we're the International Trade Administration. That name says it all. We are really, really geographically distributed. We're in over 100 locations throughout the world. We have a fairly small staff. It's ranges from 2,500 to a little over 3,000. However, because of that geographic distribution, it's really challenging to do all things cyber, among other things. But logging in particular is going to be a bit of a challenge. Luckily, we were already kind of heading in this direction. We, because of that geographic distribution, have been pursuing a decentralized model. And we're moving more and more of our services into the cloud and moving endpoints and cloud together. So I agree with the challenge that a lot of other people have stated here. We don't have any funding for this, and that's going to be a big hurdle to get over. And also, what do we do with these logs? I came up in a SOC. That was where I cut my teeth. So I know when you see something anomalous, you really want to dive into the logs, and that's where you get to these things. And correlating them so that you see how these different events match up is extremely important. And I think is one of the key features of how we use this. We are not currently pursuing this, but I would love to start getting some machine learning on this, which is doing the same thing our SOC operatives do, but at a much faster rate.
Right. Yeah, we'll definitely talk a little more about that maybe with the first question. And Will, you've had the opportunity to make your way around the federal landscape, and then also I know you link back to your commercial side with your CTO organization. How has this evolved, and what do you see across agencies and some of the challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm going to add much value above my esteemed panelists when it comes to the organizational and budgetary challenges that they face on the government side, primarily defending against cyber threats, but of course complying with the executive order. Focusing a little bit more on the technical challenges with event data collection, analysis, and logging. To be honest, I sort of accidentally ended up working in the cybersecurity, cyber defense domain, if you will. My background's really more on the database, the data side, data lakes, NoSQL, and most recently, I've been spending a lot of time with dealing data in motion with Apache Kafka since I moved to Confluent. So I worked across lots of different business and mission domains, and I didn't know much about the data that we'd be seeing from a cybersecurity perspective. But honestly, once I joined Confluent, I just, by virtue of the fact that I kept on getting sucked into these projects, using Confluent and Kafka to handle cyber event data, I kind of learned about it. So I'm trying to catch up with the rest of the panelists here. I would say, a few lessons that I've learned from working across projects in DoD, but also in industry as well with energy and financial services. First, I guess large organizations rarely have one tool, right? They're using to analyze this event data. And even when there is a chosen standard, usually there's like components or sub-organizations that have the tools that they're comfortable with, they know how to use. So you might have your SOC people using Splunk, but then you have some other people that are doing their own custom analytics or using Elastic. So as we look to bolster the event collection processing, and that's one of the things that I think our panelists have already said, the executive order has called for it. We actually also have to be mindful that data needs to flow to multiple different technologies, locations, orgs, et cetera, in a decentralized way, including sharing with CISA and FBI, right? I mean, that was also called out. And so those demands are kind of similar between tools and organizations. So we have to think more about flow rather than just data ingest. I guess another one is that there are just a ton of different data sources that we need to tap in. And OMB did a great job in their memo. If you haven't read it, just take a peruse. They talked about the different categories, but not all that data is created equally, right? Some of it is like really high volume, but relatively low value. And so, for some of them, it's prohibitively expensive to just like slam it into your SIM tool, right? You don't necessarily want to do that because there's a cost associated, or even the long-term retention of that can be more challenging. So it's really important to think about how we're going to manage that, and potentially, rather than just retaining that all, how do we deal with some of that as it flows through? Like, how do we act on it as it's being created? And I guess the final thing, and I'll hand it back over to you, is, unless a lot of attention is given to which data is going to be retained and how it's going to be organized, oftentimes in these data lakes, there's very little return on investment. So unless you know exactly what you're going to do with it in the data lake and the questions you're going to ask and you plan for it, you need to think about that. And I think the other challenge is this is almost all in the cloud, which is great because it makes it cheaper. But if you have a distributed organization with lots of on-prem, then there's an impact in getting it there. So definitely, some technical and budgetary challenges. I don't envy you folks that are trying to deal with this without extra budget. So.
Thanks, Will. I think you framed that very well. The first question I'm going to try to ask each of you is, Ralph, what do you plan on doing with all these logs, except for what you would think is like an investigation when something went bad? What can you do with it as you're retaining it?
So again, there's a lot of logs that we collect already, and we are funneling it through our SIM for that matter. So We actually do use user analytics, right? We have some analytical tool that we're using to see, hey, are there any suspicious activities that we should be looking at, right? And acting upon it, right? We have business rules that get to the top, or those things that are key for my SOC analyst to look at. But we have to act on it, right? So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at, trying to enhance our end user ability to look for suspicious activity, if you would. That's just one aspect.
Thank you. How about you, Allison? I know you talked about some things yesterday.
Yes, one thing that I think might be important with the huge amounts of data is to start setting up some machine learning in order to actually weed out a lot of the data that's not needed so that you can focus. And then predictive analytics to really put 2 and 2 together and try to predict what areas of data you really want to pay attention to. Because even if you have 2 or 3 analysts looking all day at this stuff, that might not be enough. So you have to pare it down. You have to be able to hone in. It's work. It's not easy. And again, the data could be on-prem or in the cloud or legacy or very modern, and usually a mixture. So there are going to be enormous challenges with this, but it's important.
Yeah, I agree.
Really important.
Great. Joe?
Well, as I noted earlier, I think correlation is key. I mean, you see one failed authentication attempt in one place, it's not a big deal, but you see it in 20 places, you know you've got an attack on your hands. So matching those things up and making sure that you can pull the noise out so that the signal comes through is critically important, because the noise is going to increase. The more stuff you pull in, the more noise you have as well.
Great. Paul?
Yeah, as the other panelists were talking, I was thinking that the executive or the OMB memorandum actually calls out some of this, right? In the more mature levels, EL 2 and 3, maybe it talks about how agencies should now be using this intel source to do some near real-time or real-time type of searching hunt activities, right? One of the things they talk about, though, is you need to take some time to sort of baseline what is normal behavior on my network before you can tell what's abnormal, right? So I think that's going to be a really huge challenge, that it's almost like you're trying to, what's the old saying? You're trying to fix the car as it's in motion, because you're going to be collecting all these logs and at the same time trying to figure out, well, what's my normal sort of activity on my network, so that then I can tell what's abnormal as I'm adding more and more stuff in all the time. I think it's going to be a real challenge until we can get a lid on it.
Yep. And Ralph, I'm kind of thinking back when we did that SolarWinds one, were we all seeing some of the same things at the same time? And you have to worry about your own agency, but are you worried about how can we compare notes with other agencies effectively?
Certainly, that's always an indication if we could get some intel from other organizations. So today I met with my regulated entities, and we share projects about projects and other, anytime there's an indication of compromise, they alert us, we alert them. So I think it's beneficial. So again, if I could use that information, if I'm getting an alert through my log events or whatever, and I could share it to someone else, either through CISA or through my relationship with each of the people, either on this call or across the federal government and even with industry, that's a big plus, right? Because something happening over here on one side, it's probably going to happen over here. So we need to raise our awareness and be able to communicate and share that information. So yeah.
Right. Will, you want to add anything?
Well, I mean, I'm glad that you two just brought up like cross-organizational sharing and how important that is. It is something that, given the number of different projects I've been touching, I've been sort of working to help collaborate with, which is if we find heuristics that can detect a pattern, how do we find an effective way to disseminate that across multiple organizations so everyone's not working in isolation, that we can get economies of scale across government. So I've been working on an open source heuristic specification called Sigma. It's a technical detail, it doesn't really matter. But the point is, if I'm a SOC analyst, I find a threat, how do I publish that for other people to consume? And then how can I operate sort of at the edge, at the point of data collection? So I have all these rules. Can I do that in real time as it's occurring? It's a really, really important speed to detection and sharing that information for sure.
Great, great. Thank you for that. We're going to do a few polls because I don't want to get on the wrong side of our accreditation people. It's like our unfunded mandate. We have to kind of keep up with this stuff. So we have some good ones today. And please answer, if you're not a federal employee but work at a federal agency, maybe answer on behalf of them. But in your opinion, how much has the executive order affected your agency's cybersecurity plan for the upcoming year? Greatly affected, slightly? You do not know. So if we can answer that pretty quickly, and I don't think the host and panelists, we can't vote, so we don't get a say in this. But okay, what do we have? Yeah, we've done a webinar or two on the cybersecurity executive order. So I'm thinking it's a pretty much in marching orders for federal agencies. And that this kind of like tells us that. Fantastic. I think that's going to rise as time goes on, obviously. Definitely. Okay, our next question. How important is event logging to improving cybersecurity? All right, if we can get folks answering. Very important, slightly important, not important, I do not know. This should be interesting. So I know our folks on our webinars are quick triggers, so I think we've had enough time, Melissa, if you want to show that. Wow, we're at the right place. Great. Anybody surprised? Kind of what you thought? Oh. All right, and then the last one is, see this. In your opinion, what is currently the biggest cyber threat your agency is facing? Okay, we got multiple choice, which always made it easy for me in college. If I didn't have multiple choice, I actually had to answer this, actually had to know it. Let's see what we have here. Go ahead, Alyssa. There you go. All right. So that was actually pretty interesting. And I got a question. I'm stealing it from another event I was doing with state and local. They actually brought something up. And for those of you, we're talking event logging, but the cybersecurity executive order has lots of things. And then you have your day-to-day job. How do you budget cybersecurity? What goes into that alchemy that you do, that you come up with? Maybe start off with you, Allison. What, event logging part of your cybersecurity profile. How do you put, budget for this as well as everything else? Let's see how the sausage is made.
Well, it's a challenge. I think lately, cybersecurity is always important and always a major portion of a CIO budget, as it should be. If it isn't, there's a problem. But this is, we've got guidance coming out very swiftly, but it's good guidance. It makes common sense. It's something that we need to do. So but we have to balance that because we still need to do development work and keep systems up to date for security reasons. Keep our end users happy, especially with remote work. They need collaboration tools or whatever. So we're balancing the security, but this is a huge challenge. There's a lot of detail in this memorandum, and a lot to comply with. And You know, but it is important, as the poll demonstrated.
Yeah, I think the cybersecurity, sometimes you have these mandates that are very, reporting, and it seems like the things they're trying to do are actually useful to cybersecurity. So, generally speaking, Ralph, how about you? What goes through the process making sausage over FA?
So I have a couple of different perspectives on this. First of all, I don't do it in a vacuum. I rely heavily on my team. They're far smarter than I am. They know what is needed, and they will talk about it throughout the year. And then as it gets time to start budgeting for it, we prioritize it based on all the other things that we have to do. But I'll always try to fund something, at least from my perspective, if I have the resources to support it. What I really can't stand is just to buy a tool, a software, just put it on the shelf and leave it alone. So I'm very conscious about how we spend our money. So the good news from my perspective is I'm a federal agency, although I don't go through the typical budgeting process to get funding. We use non-appropriated funds. We don't go to the executive department and then go to Congress to get it approved. We levy a fee against our regulated entities, right? And that's how we get our funding. So I will take this a little step further, and I will leverage current events in the world to sort of support my budget. So everything from ransomware to SolarWinds, I kind of leverage the popular things in the news, because no one, let's face it, executive boards do not like to be the outliers where they say no to cybersecurity. So I've been able to take advantage of that, and I'm not, I'm not being facetious or anything. I'm just saying I was able to leverage some of these real world events to get additional funding that perhaps may have been a little bit harder to acquire, but
yeah,
it's been no questions asked, but can you speed it up as opposed to no, you're not getting that. So
right,
so,
that's how you get your business case, right? That's fantastic. And I just, as a side note, I know that some agencies got some zero trust funding. You can use the Technology Modernization Fund. That's pretty good way to get some more money. I thought it was pretty good. Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. At Department of Labor, well, we do get appropriations, right? So we go through the budget process. A couple different ways we get the money for the cybersecurity capabilities. One is through that's an IT mod, and the portion of that is for cybersecurity. We also have a working capital fund, which, for those of you who don't know what that is, that's sort of a tax on the component programs, right? Say, okay, we're gonna charge you this much for IT, and a portion of that is for cybersecurity. Then looking for additional funding, we did put in a TMF proposal for some of the executive order things. We are awaiting on the adjudication of that. We've been successful with TMF awards in the past. We've gotten one for a data hub for visas or visa applications, and we've gotten one for data modernization. A portion of that's going to be cybersecurity. I think there's other places to get some funding for the executive order. CISA's CDM program, if you have not explored how they can help you with things like the endpoint detection and response, or maybe in some other areas, explore that. I know they are open to listening to sort of what your ideas are and what you have going on, and if they can help. I will say that I've been encouraged that some of these data calls, in particular the M2131, was not just a data call for how are you doing, right? Tell us what your status is. It included what's your estimate for how much it's going to cost for you to do this? And I find that encouraging, because I think that means they understand this is not going to be something that folks can just find with the change in their SOFA, right? We may need some funding assistance to get this, to get these logging requirements done. So I have been encouraged to see what goes on with that.
Great. And Joe?
Government security budgeting is always interesting because there's some non-discretionary, mandated spending, and that's both a blessing and a curse. It helps to get funding for things sometimes, but it also means that I spend money where I otherwise might not. But I think it's important to remember that security is not a destination, it's a process. So you have to sort of continuously reevaluate based on what your population is doing, where the risks are, and where you're going to get the most bang for that buck.
Yep. Will?
Well, obviously, I don't have much to add on a government budgeting perspective, but your point about zero trust, actually, it's worth pointing out, and all my panelists know this, that these things are intertwined. And so, if we're moving to a zero trust architecture, which we all should be, like prevention is more effective than detection. A part of that is, though, again, collection of data, right? So that you can appropriately move to that architecture. So I suppose if there is funding for zero trust, that's helpful. I also think it's helpful that the OMB memo calls out specifically the utilization of cold storage. So again, if they're putting a demands on retention of data or requirements, they recognize the storage cost that's going to be. So, even just putting that out there so that the, organizations that have to deal with this can start thinking about that early on from an architectural perspective, clearly, that helps quite a bit as well.
Great. And I'll go back to Ralph. How do we prioritize this initiative? When you've got moving to the cloud, you've got updating systems. How does this fit in? And I mean, like for you, how is that fitting into the whole portfolio of all the different things that are described in that cybersecurity, like going to zero trust, right? I mean, how do you do that?
So yeah, that's a challenge that I pretty much face every day. So it's not just what I think I need to do from the cybersecurity perspective of my team collectively, right? I have the operations team that they have a suite of tools and things that they need to deploy that I have to support, or my team has to support. So it's really a juggling act. I have to be honest. At times it's a juggling act. We have to plan out some of these things more effectively. We know with this particular executive order, there are multiple stages that we have to plan for, right? You have to move in 2022 in August to move to a certain level, and then in 23 you have to do the same thing, but you have to up the ante and get and improve your capabilities, right? As I think was Paul mentioned that before. So we have to plan it, and it's a matter of which ones are going to be more painful, or do I need, you have to figure out, do I need more resources? Do I need money? Am I going to get the money? Perhaps. So it's kind of a give and take. It's not that easy from my perspective to figure out, but we do plan. We also try to look at it from, if I take a step back, I look at it from a risk management perspective, right? We've talked a lot about zero trust. What's going to enhance the overall my security posture, reduce my risk exposure, and what's the biggest bang for the buck, right? Sometimes it could be some low-hanging fruit with a small investment versus a much bigger investment, but it's either going to take time to reach achieve the benefits, or there may not be a big bang for the buck. So that's kind of a trade-off that we have to make, and we have to look at those pieces of the puzzle on a day-to-day basis, if you would.
I think that's a really good point. Let's go to Allison.
Okay. Ralph has brought up a lot of challenges. I think we all face them. Zero trust and also this logging initiative. Between the two, I think we've got a very challenging situation where we really have to plan out what's appropriate for our environment, our agency, our systems. I'm certain we're going to have a lot of wonderful help from private industry, but those of us in government really need to, with the understanding of what we have, as you said, Ralph, the risk, what's the biggest risk, we've got a lot of thinking to do between the two initiatives. Zero Trust is taking a lot of thought and planning. And this one, even though they've laid it out very well in the memorandum, applying it to each individual agency is going to be an interesting challenge. As we were already logging a lot of this, but some we aren't, and we may not be logging it in a way that they've spelled out here. So should be interesting.
Yeah.
Lots of work ahead.
Yep. Paul?
Well, I just agree with everything Allison and Ralph had said. I guess I can add a little perspective to some of those from our perspective here. And I think it was Ralph who brought up the point that where do I get the most bang for my buck with these things? And that, at least on the surface, right, is the downside of the executive order. The executive order, if you just read the language in the order, has made those decisions for you. You are going to do this by this date, this by this date, and this by this date. And I know I've felt, and I think some of my colleagues on the panel have felt, that does take away a little bit of our ability to say, well, this makes sense for my organization to make this priority versus, well, that makes sense for me to hold off on or not do to that level. And I think, personally in DOL, that is a challenge I will have if, as I suspect, we may not be able to do everything in the time frame or to the capacity the executive order wants us to with the resources we have available, right? Then I'm going to need to articulate those choices and risk reward to our leadership. And one of the risks is going to be not a security risk, right? But a risk that we are not going to meet the executive order. So I think those things are going to come into play, and that was an interesting angle that Ralph brought up that I wanted to comment on. So,
Yeah. Well, if we don't fund this, you're going to be in trouble with the White House. That's not usually you might get some funding that way. I kind of like that. Joe?
Yeah, I agree with Paul. I would like to see some more flexibility in how we can interpret this and get the most bang for the buck, because we don't all have the same environment. I think I'm kind of an extreme case, but even within some of the other organizations, we're not all working with the same data. We're not working with the same people and in the same environment. Having said that, I do think that there is a general paradigm that we're trying to align to with these executive orders, and looking to the spirit of what they're trying to accomplish and align to that paradigm is useful, and that's how we're approaching it.
Yep. Great, Joe. And Will?
Well, I think you mentioned, or you brought up the topic as how does this impact other priorities, or how do you mix it in with other priorities? And I've been working just recently on some projects on the DoD side where the rate of data collection for some of this is significant enough. It has a fairly major impact on the networks that need to be used for actual mission data. And that's when you have a problem, right? Because if you have a decentralized organization, you have bases all over the world. And I think that's a good proxy probably for other organizations as well. But the bottom line is, you can't fill it all up with cyber data. You need to figure out how to deal with some of this, compress some of it, process some of it at the edge, so you're not sucking up all those pipes going to the cloud, which, by the way, is expensive. So I do think that's a balancing act for you folks, for sure. It's like, okay, we need to comply with this. We need to store 30 months worth of XYZ noisy data, yet we got to get it into the cloud to do that. How am I going to do that when it's 1,000 megabits per second for a very large data center? I'm just, that's a realistic number I saw at one of these data centers. So it's not going to be easy. And I do think just working on it in a distributed fashion is going to be kind of important, just from a networking and how it impacts other mission priorities.
Yeah. So in Zero Trust land, ATARC, we worked with Sean Connolly from CISA, and Jerry Connolly, he's a HHSOIG, and he led our working group, and we came up with like 11 different scenarios, and we established a lab to address those. So we had industry involved. I'm almost thinking, just talking out loud, maybe an event working group around this event logging where we get government folks, get the industry people together, get CISA, get OMB, to talk, and we're just communicating. We just kind of figured this out together. Seems like it's a big issue, and it seems like that would be a good role for HR to kind of like bring everybody together. Just thinking out loud, because there's not like one group right now addressing this. Everybody's kind of doing it in their silos, I take it. Okay, yeah. So that's why we started HR, for these kinds of things. If anybody wants to ask any questions, we're getting this panel is moving by quick, but if you want to ask any questions, that would be fantastic. One thing I want to ask before we let everybody go is, what is our plans for next year? So let's say we do this at the end of the next year. What are we trying to get done? What is realistic that we can get done within our organizations to by the end of next year? Maybe starting off with you, Ralph. What do you think you guys can pull off in your agency? Where would you like to be?
Yeah, I think, as those of us that read the memorandum, I think we could achieve the first phase in August of 2022, right? To come to a certain level of capability, and we're starting to plan that out now. So I'm pretty comfortable we'll be there. But I want to take a step back and talk about some of the things that we chatted about earlier, right? How else are we going to be using this data to give us more intelligence, more information to act upon what's going on the network or across the enterprise, right? To give us a better perspective. That's what I'm really going to try to focus on, using and leveraging this information to help better react or plan or mitigate, for that matter. But I will throw, you mentioned about questions. I do want to throw this out though. For those of us that have been in this business for a long time, this particular directive goes into a lot more detail than many of the other OMB directives that I've been involved with for many, many years. So I wonder if OMB, perhaps, or CISA are taking down to a next level, that future directives are going to be a lot more prescriptive. And I think it was Paul that indicated that they're making a decision for us, even though we are ultimately responsible for the security of the network, right? Perhaps they're going to be drilling down much, much further and requiring us to do, a lot more work, right? Which is a good thing in some regards, right? These are all good. We all understand these are good things to do to help protect your network, but at the risk, at the trade-off of what else?
Good question. Did they do this guidance with like the CISO council? I can't imagine they did it in complete vacuum.
Yeah.
Or do we know, Ralph?
I don't know. I wasn't involved.
I think they consulted with NIST and CISA on the guidance or on the memorandum.
Right.
Yeah, and
that's
it is a quicker way to get some direction out there than going through the NIST process, right? Where it has to go through public review and et cetera, et cetera. But I think in the executive order, what they gave the creators of this only, so much time from the release of the executive order to issue the, memorandum about doing logging. So they were under a tight time frame themselves and had to get it out.
Yeah. So back to my original question, Paul, what are you looking to do over the next year?
Well, hope to identify some funding sources for this, because it's doing this was not in our 22 budget. So we are looking for how are we going to fund any additional needs for this and the other items in the executive order. And, our intention is to meet it. Now, how we're going to do that, I don't know. I do know that it's going to be interesting because, right, we've got a plan, but we're like that fighter steps into the ring. We've got a plan that's going to hold up until we get punched in the nose, right? So we have to expect the unexpected. And like Will and some of the others were saying, that punch in the nose is going to be what are the ripple effects of trying to collect and move all this data and we're going to have to deal with that as it comes up, right? How are we planning for that? Do we have contingencies in place? Do we have capacity in place to ramp up if and when those things happen? I think that's going to be very interesting.
Great. Allison? You're on mute. There you go.
I have no real insight into why this seems to be a little more detailed than other guidance that's come out, except that I believe in reaction to the SolarWinds attack, there was probably a lack of the common data they needed to make, a quick analysis across government. I also hope that there'll be some common data tools, analytical tools, that will be developed by government agencies to use as a whole. But I think that they're jumping in and saying we need this, and this right away is part of just getting the foundation built. But again, I think we also need to make this meaningful for our own agencies and for our cyber stance.
Great. Joe?
To sort of throw another log on the fire that everybody else is building here, I think that there is a tendency towards more prescriptive guidance, and I'm disappointed by that. I'd like to see more focus on results and not dictating process. But as far as your question and where we're going to go next year, I think we're lucky in that we were already kind of heading in this direction. So I think moving more towards a decentralized zero trust environment, and logging is a component of that move. So we're just going to continue heading the way we were and incorporate this guidance along with it.
Great. Will?
I mean, I'm going to continue to do what I have been doing, trying to help make our customers and those that are not our customers as well successful, and find a way to deal with event collection, process, and handling in a way that's cost effective and then avoids lock into any given vendor. It gives maximum flexibility. I mean, cost efficiency is key here. Like, we have to find a way to make this cost effective. So if we can get greater, like Allison said, like if we can get economies of scale across different government organizations by reusing stuff, that's awesome. So I'll certainly be doing my best to support that with stuff I've been doing with Kafka and Confluent. Great.
Thanks, Will. And I do think we need to talk about a working group. We got to hook up with you guys about that from the industry perspective. I think there's something there. So my last question of the day is what do we need to talk about that we didn't talk about? What did we not cover? What are the some things that or some points you want to make just in closing? We'll start off with you, Ralph. For some reason, you're getting all the first questions every time. I don't know how that happened. I usually mix it around. But you're a veteran. Remember, you were on the SolarWinds panel, so you're definitely a veteran. So,
well, tell you what. How about if I let some of my other colleagues go first? How about that? Let's give them the line.
Well played, Ralph.
But, feel free, Will. Go right ahead. Seriously,
Well, I guess my main point is kind of in line with my other comments, is that there is not a single technology or perfect approach that is going to solve all the problems. It doesn't exist. Unfortunately, we don't have it. I wish we did, but we don't, because it doesn't exist. It's going to take a number of different collaboration between industry and government and multiple tools that do what they do really, really well, to be honest. And so that's important when we're thinking about it. Is like, we can't just go to a single vendor and expect them to do everything. That's not going to be cost effective, and it's not going to get us the best results.
Yeah, I think we've known that, Will, from our Zero Trust lab. I've got 53 companies in there, and not one company can do everything.
Yeah,
just isn't possible in Zero Trust, right? So, Paul, any final comments? Thoughts?
Oh, you caught me writing down Zero Trust Lab on my notepad here. That was an interesting metric you just gave there about the 53 and none can do it all. I'll take a step back a little bit and just look at the executive order in sort of general. Okay, so first of all, if I was writing up an executive order for cybersecurity, I'm pretty sure I would put those same types of things in it for today, right? Zero trust encryption, multi-factor authentication, supply chain, logging, threat intel sharing, all great stuff. But I just have to wonder that because this is a multi-year strategy. I've even heard, folks from the administration say that this could be a decade-long process to get from point A to the final point that you want to get to. And technology and threats change so fast. Is what's state of the practice today, zero trust architecture, right? Is that going to be what's needed 3-5 years from now? Or is it going to be something new? Negative trust architecture, right? Well, that's the new thing that you need to do. I don't know. It would probably be more intellectually interesting to me if I wasn't in the middle of it, right? And go, I'll just step back and watch and see if this, how this will evolve. But that's something, because I could think back, what were the hot things to do 5 years ago? They're not the hot things to do now. They're not the things that are going to protect you today, were the things we were thinking of 5 years ago. So let's just make sure we're nimble a little bit too, and can pivot to what the new threat vectors are, what the bad guys are going to adapt to this. What are they going to adapt to? And we can adapt it as well. I think cloud will help here, because that's a more nimble approach to some of this stuff. So as we move things to the cloud, that should help. But that's a closing thought I had.
No, I think you're right, Paul. And I just think of the next SolarWinds, something like that. That's going to change things, right? And we got to expect that something is going to happen, and some different kind of attack that's going to happen. Joe?
Yeah, I think to echo what Paul was just saying, the flexibility we need to be nimble like that is very important, and we seem to be trending the opposite direction as a federal government. So I think that's very important. But the other thing that we sort of touched on that I think is critically important is we got to get better at communicating with each other. We tend to operate in very siloed environments, even within our own organizations. I know from Department of Commerce, we don't talk to each other nearly enough. I'd like to see more of that, but I think that's going to be very important to resolving our challenges in the future.
Great. Allison?
I agree with what everyone has said. And I think the one thing with initiatives like this is we need to incorporate it. We need to take it seriously. It's a good thing. So zero trust, but we also need to keep level-headed and prioritize and make sure there isn't something else lurking out there that we need to do that's very critical. So we can't follow blindly and just focus in on certain areas. We really need to understand everything going on in our environments and across government, and make sure that our approach encompasses all the areas that we need to look at.
Great. Thank you for that, Allison. Will, I think you're getting the final word here.
No, I win. It's Ralph's turn, remember?
Oh, Ralph, you want it? Yeah, does Ralph want the final word? That's right.
I defer to Will, so thank you for.
Okay, yeah, so you kept your place. You are getting the final word now. You had the first word, now you have the final word.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Tom. So along with many other directives, right, I certainly agree with what Will said, Paul, and Joe, right? So we all talked about sort of the same things, right? We want to be nimble, flexible, change as a threat landscape changes, but we really need to take this initiative and bring us back to our enterprise risk management programs to see where does this fit in our grand scheme, right? All OMB directives really focus on, they have to fit everything from the small mom and pop federal agencies that have 100 or less people to, the DOLs and the DODs of the world, right, that have hundreds of thousands of people. So that covers a large swath of people, right? The smaller, and I sit on a small agency, I work with a number of folks on a small agency CISO council, and there are groups that are still working on critical things, what I would call like multi-factor authentication. So you really need to take a step back and see how does this particular set of requirements fit in your enterprise risk management program. So that's what I'll leave with my thoughts today.
Great. Well, we were going to sneak in a last little poll question. Do you need your CP certificate mailed to you? We will. That's the kind of service you get here at the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. And if you say yes, we'll get it sent to you. And you don't have to ping us 3 months from now. So anyway, thanks. Thank you, Ralph, Paul, Allison, Joe, and Will. This has been a great discussion and enjoyed it a lot. Thank you for your time. This has really been illuminating to me, and I think I try to see a lot, know a lot. I've learned a lot from this webinar, probably more than I have on most. But our next webinar is optimizing IT operations with AI ops. We got a power pack panel there. That should be a lot of fun on the 4th from 1:30 to 2:30. But thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.